Good afternoon, and welcome to the Nebraska State Historical Society's Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name is Ann Billisbach, and I'm the Associate Director for Museum and Historic Sites here at the Historical Society. As you probably all know, this series is a regular program of the Historical Society. We have a program every third Thursday of the month here at the Museum of Nebraska History. And for a detailed schedule of the programs, please go to our website. I think you will see it on the bottom of your screen for those of you watching on television, and for those of you that aren't, www.nebraskahistory.org is the address. You'll find a schedule for not only this program, but also all of the other activities that the Historical Society sponsors. So please go to that website. Before I introduce today's speakers, I want to thank the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation. They fund the filming of these lectures, and their financial support allows us to tape and broadcast these programs on public access television, and we're very grateful for that support. Today's program is entitled Treasures from the Collections of the Nebraska State Historical Society. We do this regularly for our December program. We feel it's a wonderful way to share with everybody some of the wonderful things that we have in our collections. We have three speakers today. Laura Mooney, who is the curator in our Museum Collections Department, Tom Mooney, who is Manuscripts curator in the Library Archives Division, and Salvador Barrigan, who is curator of public records in the Library Archives collection. These are the people who acquired, organized, document, and manage the collections of the Historical Society, both the two-dimensional and three-dimensional things that we collect. They know the collections better than anyone because they work with them on a daily basis. So we're pleased that they're going to share with us a few of those treasures that the Historical Society holds in trust for the people of Nebraska. Help me welcome Laura, Tom, and Salvador.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. My name again is Tom Mooney, and I'm the curator of manuscripts here at the Nebraska State Historical Society. So I handle all of the private papers, personal and family papers, private business records, and organizational records. And the title of our lecture is Treasures from the Collections, and that can mean different things to different people. I could have focused on some of our well-known collections. Obviously, we have materials from Willa Cather, Mari Sandoz, William Jennings Bryan, and others. But I thought I would try and pull out some items from collections that most people might not know that we have. So this first collection, we have a collection of materials on historic windmills, and it's a trade literature collection. It was compiled as a reference resource for people that were interested in the history of windmills and their placement along the Great Plains. It consists of mostly vendor materials, catalogs and price lists from various companies, a little bit of technical information, but most of it is kind of promotional in nature. And it consists of companies from Nebraska as well as the surrounding states. This one here is a price list from 1927 from the Air Motor Company out of Chicago, which this was a popular brand of windmill. Here is another promotional item put out by Air Motor, just showing the strength of their windmill. You can see there are 6 gentlemen standing on top of the windmill there and showing how it can support their weight, so it can probably withstand the heavy winds that you'll find here in Nebraska and along the Great Plains. Now, most of the materials in this collection probably range in date from the 19-teens or 1920s up through about the 1970s. Although there are a few earlier materials and some materials that go up through about the 1990s. Here's another price list. This is from a company here in Nebraska out of Omaha, the Challenge Company. It's another promotional item from the Cornell Supply Company of Lincoln. And here again, this is showing how resilient these windmills are. They're saying they're cyclone-proof. So they're always playing on the fact that they have the strongest windmills out there. Here's another catalog and price list from the Dultmeyer Manufacturing Company. The manufacturing portion of this company was actually in Iowa, but the sales company was based out of Omaha. They sold and produced the Samson brand windmill. This might be a familiar name to some of you. This is the Dempster Mill Manufacturing Company, which is now called Dempster Industries, out of Beatrice, Nebraska. And you'll see quite a few of these around the state still as you go driving through the rural areas. This is from inside the catalog. This is just a nice illustration of what the manufacturing plant at Nebraska, at Beatrice looked like, probably circa the 1930s or 1940s. This is a catalog from the Muller Windmill and Supply Company out of Randolph, Nebraska. And this is kind of an educational thing for me because I didn't realize that there were so many little companies here in Nebraska that produced and sold windmills, but there are quite a few. And here's just another catalog showing from a different state. This is from the San Antonio Machine and Supply Company out of San Antonio, Texas. And like I said, this collection isn't complete by any means. There are a lot of gaps in it, but this is just a good resource for people that are interested in the kinds of windmills that were produced and sold throughout the Great Plains. Some of the other states represented in this collection include Kansas, Iowa, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, etc. The second collection I want to talk about, it's kind of related to the first one. We have the corporate records for the Kregel Windmill Company out of Nebraska City, Nebraska. And this is just a promotional item here advertising the Eli windmill, which is what they produced. And this company was founded by George Kregel in the 1890s. And he worked with his brother for a while until his brother quit and moved to St. Louis to start a casket company. The majority of the collection consists of financial records, incorporation papers, as well as promotional materials. This is just an example of one of the corporate permits that they purchased through the state of Nebraska around 1917. There's also some detailed technical information. This is one of the patent drawings for part of the windmill. I think it's one of the armatures off of the windmill. But besides being interested in producing windmills, George Kregel was also interested in beekeeping. And so he produced a series of beehives and beekeeper supplies, and this one was appropriately titled the Hummer Beehive. And included with that, we also have the patent documents and drawings showing how that was to be reproduced. Now, for those, this is another obvious plug for our museum store. For those of you who haven't finished your Christmas shopping, the museum store does have a number of windmill-related objects. Here are a few examples, a couple of models that we have for sale here in the museum store. Now, the third collection I would like to talk about is that of Elmer Ellsworth Blackman, or E.E. Blackman. And for those of you that are here in the audience today, this auditorium is actually named after him because he was the first archaeologist here at the Nebraska State Historical Society. He was born and grew up in Iowa and came to Nebraska in the early 1890s. Where he was a school teacher and then became principal of the school at Roca, Nebraska. But he'd always had an interest in history and archaeology, and so he kind of took it upon himself to do a little local reconnaissance of the archaeological sites in the area. And he wrote a number of papers and articles that were reproduced in some of the local publications of the time, one of which was called The Conservative, which was produced by J. Sterling Morton. And because of their joint interest in local archaeology, they became friends, And through J. Sterling Morton's urging, Blackman decided to quit his job and devote himself full-time to research and writing, which I'm not sure how he was expecting to support himself doing that, but that's what he did. But luckily, through his friendship with J. Sterling Morton, he actually became the first archaeologist here at the State Historical Society about 1901. But besides being an amateur archaeologist, he was also a businessman. And the story goes that apparently he found some pottery at one of the excavations that he did here in Nebraska that was really well preserved. And he was kind of intrigued by, why it hadn't broken down in the soil. And I'm not sure if he, found some sort of substance on it or what it was, but he became interested in the whole idea of waterproofing. And through various research and working with chemists and things, he developed his own line of a waterproofing product called Hydrozo. And originally it was sold by a company in Iowa, but then he went out on his own and founded the Hydrozo Waterproofing Company. At this time it was based out of Kansas City, but after a few years he moved it back to Lincoln, Nebraska. And they were here in Nebraska for quite a few years, and they produced a lot of this Hydrozo. This is just an image of one of the Hydrozo cans, which we actually have on display up in our Made in Nebraska exhibit upstairs. And surprisingly enough, they continued producing this product and other products as well up through the early 1990s. And at that time, their company was bought out by another company out on the East Coast. And over the years, that company's been bought out several times, but the Hydrozo line is still being produced today by the multinational chemical company BASF. So kind of from humble beginnings to a multinational corporation. It's kind of interesting. But as I mentioned, he was also an archaeologist, and there are a number of things in the collection relating to his interests and research in that matter. This is an article that he wrote. It's about a boulder that was discovered in western Nebraska. And actually, I believe it was found by a team of paleontologists from the State Museum. But it had various carvings and kind of like hieroglyphics on it. So they brought it back to campus. And I believe it was actually sitting out on campus for a while, but I think has since been moved back into the State Museum collections. But E.E. Blackman was really interested in this boulder and the carvings on it. So he did some research, and this is just the manuscript from the collection talking about this boulder. And he was making comparisons of the engravings on this boulder to other things that had been found in the area as well as elsewhere. And he compared it to a boulder that was found in Dighton, Massachusetts. And he did various tracings of the engravings and was comparing them and felt that they were probably produced by the same Native American group. That was his supposition anyway. But I also found some information that at one point they were comparing the Nebraska boulder to that of the Kensington runestone in Minnesota, which later on, of course, turned out to be a hoax. So I'm not really sure what the final consensus was on the engravings on that. So finally, the last collection I would like to talk about is that of the Northwestern School of Taxidermy out of Omaha. And this was a correspondence school. It was started around 1903 by J.W. Elwood, and he was a taxidermist and started this school just to provide instruction to others who were just interested in taxidermy as a hobby or to go into it as professionals. Unfortunately, I'm not sure what happened to the majority of the records for this school. As far as I know, this school was still active up through the mid-1990s. I haven't found any evidence of what happened after that. I've contacted various national organizations trying to find what happened to their records, but no one seems to know. So mostly what we have in our collection are school catalogs, promotional materials, various lesson books, that sort of thing. And actually the school was located for many years at about 12th and Howard Street in downtown Omaha, if you know where that is. Here's another example of one of the school catalogs that is in the collection, a little more recent version. And this is one of the lesson books. There are several series of lesson books in the collection based on the kind of animal that you wanted to stuff and mount. So there were various instructions for large game animals such as bear and deer and elk, as well as small mammals, reptiles, amphibians, just about anything you can think of. They had various step-by-step lessons on how to take care of those specimens. And a lot of these older ones have some really nice engravings and some nice images of the specimens and kind of step-by-step of how to go about various processes and how to deal with them. One thing I thought was really kind of funny about this collection and about this school is that they really tried to promote what they called novelty taxidermy. And it was basically putting animals in kind of amusing situations, which I don't know, not sure why they decided to do that, but that was one of the big promotions. And another interesting side note is that Mr. Elwood, he also had a taxidermy supply shop, so he could just sell all of his supplies to the students that registered to him. But this got me thinking about, this would be an interesting hobby to have because you could make some really great gifts for people. A squirrel cigar lighter. I don't know that I'd want the lighter that close to him. I'm afraid of starting the little guy on fire. But apparently they thought that this was a good idea, something that you could really do and give to people. So not exactly sure how that was supposed to work, but. But if you don't have a smoker in the family, you don't have a smoker that's a friend, what else could you give them? Well, how about a frog claw? I mean, it's pretty fancy. He looks like a really happy little guy there. You can have it sitting on your mantle. I have 2 or 3 at home. I think that'd be a great. In fact, I think I'm going to try and get our museum store to start offering these as well. But a lot of people, they've already got clocks. They probably don't need another clock. So what else you can do? Well, find something for their game room. I mean, a couple little rabbits playing pool. And I'm not really sure where they got these little miniature pool tables and things. I don't know that his taxidermy supply company actually sold those. So I'm guessing he must have contracted with a miniature dollhouse maker or something like that to get some of these items. But kind of amusing nonetheless. But finally, if you've got gifts for all your friends and family and you're looking for something to try and impress your boss at work, maybe you want to remind him how hard working you are and try and get that Christmas bonus out of him. Well, you could do something like this and kind of show him how hard you're working there. Of course, you'd have to kind of swap out the old typewriter for a computer and put little name tags there so he knows who it is. But of course, you can swap out the different animals, too, based on the personalities of your office mates. Something to think about. But finally, if you decide that maybe, giving a dead animal as a present probably isn't the best route, we do have a number of more fun things in our museum store, so you can, come and take a look at those and maybe pick up one of those for your family and friends. So. That's really about all I have to talk about for my segment anyway. Next up will be Laura Mooney, and she'll be talking about some of the treasures from the museum collections. And we'll hold all questions until the very end, and so just let us know if you want to know anything else about some of these collections we're talking about, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. Okay, Laura?
Well, I think Tom's just trying to drop some really big hints about what he wants for Christmas. I'm Laura Mooney, and I'm the registrar here in the museum collections, and today I'm going to talk to you about a few new acquisitions we've received at the museum in the last couple of years here. For those of you who were here during Nebraska Centennial, you probably remember the statehood stamp that was launched in 1967, which you can see here. Today I'm going to show you a collection received in 2005, and it contains more than 70 sketches and drawings of proposed artwork for the Centennial stamp. In 2005, we did receive this collection. It was donated by Ivan Buzz Sawyer of La Vista, and it is all designs and drawings by the stamp's designer, Julian K. Billings. Billings was actually raised here in Nebraska in the Nebraska Sandhills and attended the American Academy of Arts in Chicago. He was the vice president and executive art director at Savage Dow Incorporated in Omaha, which was an advertising firm there. There's some really fascinating things in the collection, including very rough sketches like this one. And then you can see the more finished drawing here for a Nebraska National Guard themed stamp. He had many state capitol designs in mind as well, like these and this one. And he also did some nice ones of the sower here. I'm also rather fond of this stamp here featuring homesteaders. And some of his stamps had kind of a look back at the past and look forward to the present, like the other one here on the right. But at some point, he seemed to have really decided to focus on cows and corn. So we have many different designs with different colors of cows, different possible orientations of the stamp. And finally, this one, this is probably the closest that we have to the final product. And there you see the final stamp design. The winning design was actually chosen by the Postmaster General's office, and it was first shown to the public on March 1st, 1967. The first day of issue was July 29th, 1967. In all, 117,225,000 of these stamps were produced. So I'll leave it up to you and for you to decide if they made the right choice. The next collection I'm going to talk about is the White Horse Ranch collection, which we received here at the Nebraska State Historical Society this year. It contains many wonderful images, many photographs, a few films, and museum objects that will be part of both the library archives and museum collections. So today I thought I'd just give you a general history of the White Horse Ranch and show you some of these things that we've received. The story begins in 1917 when Cal Thompson, who you can see here, and his brother Hud acquired a snow white stallion called Old King. And they'd been looking for a horse like Old King for quite some time. They wanted to find a horse that was essentially albino and had pink skin, but instead of pink eyes, they were looking for a horse that had dark eyes, that wouldn't have the vision problems associated with pink eyes. So the Thompsons bred Old King, and they gradually developed a herd of white horses. And in 1934, Cal met Ruth Hackenberg, who you can see here. She was a teacher in Tut Hill, South Dakota at the time, and like Cal, she'd always dreamed of owning a snow white stallion. They married in 1936 and bought out Hud's share of the white horse breeding program, and they moved to a property near Stewart, Nebraska, along the Niobrara. Raising cattle was really their main focus of their business, but they continued to breed horses and also started a breeding registry, which they called the American Albino Horse Club. They also began to train the horses, and from what people have told me, Ruth was a real go-getter, she was a real pistol, had a real can-do attitude, and she had read that horses under the age of 2 were essentially too young to be trained. But she set out to prove the right or wrong and started training their young foals. And actually what she found is the sooner that she began training them, the more quickly they learned, the easier they were to handle, and that they really loved the training. So another thing to note about the training was that the Thompsons didn't use whips or spurs. They didn't use sugar to bribe the horses. They were very gentle with the animals. And soon news spread of their training, and they were putting on Sunday afternoon shows at the ranch. Then they began to put on shows at local rodeos and appear in parades, and soon they were appearing farther and farther away from home. In 1938, they moved to a new ranch on the north side of the Niobrara, just south of Napier, Nebraska. And soon, children began writing the Thompsons and were asking them all sorts of questions about their horses and where they could learn to ride and train horses themselves. So Ruth, who'd been a school teacher, said, let's start a training school. Initially, they thought they'd charge $25 per week, but many of the children couldn't afford this amount, so they actually took kids in and let them work off part of the tuition fee by doing extra chores. The Thompsons weren't able to have children of their own, but they really loved children, so they often welcomed in kids that were from troubled families and had troubled pasts. And here's an early picture of one of the boys at the ranch. By the 1940s, some were asked to join a new traveling troupe that the ranch put together, which they called the White Horse Troupe. And they began performing around the United States and Canada. At first it was all boys, then it became co-ed, and then it was finally all girls by 1952, which you can see here. They had as many as 40 horses that they would take around with them, 10 to 20 kids, so they took lots of vehicles. As you can see, here are a few of the trucks that they traveled with. And you can see that there are murals painted on the trucks, and those were actually done by Cal Thompson, who loved to paint and often did large murals on buildings of the ranch or on trucks here. And I'll show you some more of his paintings later on. They performed wonderful tricks like jumping over a convertible, or one girl would stand atop 5 or 6 horses and jump over hurdles like this one here. They performed at places like Soldiers Field, Madison Square Gardens, and often with famous people like Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. In 1948, they also opened up an arena at the ranch, which they called the White Horse Bowl. They had 10,000 people attend the 1948 opening, which is pretty impressive considering how rural Nebraska is. The ranch was featured in many publications all over the world, including a Life magazine story in 1945. And here's a fascinating family photograph showing the photographer from Life magazine there at the ranch filming Cal with one of the horses. There were also 2 movie shorts filmed at the ranch. They were filmed in 1946 and 1952 and called Ride a White Horse and Ranch in White. And here's another family photograph where you can see filming taking place. Here's one of the promotional brochures for the ranch. In 1963, Cal passed away very suddenly on what was the eve of the final show that they had at the White Horse Bowl. 2,000 people attended his memorial the next day. Because Ruth's health was really poor at the time, she decided it would be best to close down the ranch. She auctioned off most of the equipment and sold most of the horses. She moved out of state to live closer to family. She did retain ownership of the ranch, however, and always dreamed that it could be restored one day. She also kept registering horses through the 70s and 80s under different names. And even registered some horses internationally through the International American Albino Association Incorporated. In 1985, she did move back to Napier, Nebraska, and in 1989, she decided to enlist the help of Dean and Carly Doherty to help restore the ranch. Here, I'll show you a couple photos of the ranch as it appeared this last summer. Carly has an interesting story herself. She was a former trooper and came to the ranch in 1947 at the age of 6. Her mother was a cook at the ranch at the time, and Carly became one of the youngest troopers. By the age of 14, she was said to be the star of the show, and actually the Thompsons became her legal guardians because her mother had been very sick, and so she stayed at the ranch for many years. So the Dohertys came to the ranch and helped to restore it, but in 1990, Ruth passed away. That following year, however, the White Horse Ranch was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and Ruth was inducted into the National Cowgirl Hall of Fame. Ruth's sister Ruby then inherited the ranch and continued restorations work with the help of the Dohertys. And in 1992, they began to open it up to tours in the summers. Ruby passed away in 2000 and left the ranch to her children, Betty Whipple and Bob Shoemaker. And this past summer, Betty and Bob generously decided to donate all of the White Horse Ranch's archives and some of the museum collections to the Nebraska State Historical Society. So I've shown you some of the wonderful photographs today, but there's over 100 cubic feet of archival materials, including correspondence and breeding records, registry records, publicity materials, and it's a really fascinating collection. We also received some of the costumes, which you can see here. The one in white is a child's costume worn by a very young trooper. And the costume in red was one of Ruth's Liberty Act costumes. Ruth and Ruby also made ceramics to sell at the ranch as souvenirs, so we've received a few examples of those. And here's one of Cal Thompson's paintings. Cal also probably painted this barrel, which was used in a part of the act where horses would roll barrels with their noses. And here you can see in this early photograph the mural on the side of the building that was also done by Cal. Cal often used biblical symbolism in his paintings and often gave Bible lessons as he toured people around showing his work. Also, as a side note, he taught Carly to paint, and so she donated one of the paintings that she had done to of Old King, and also some wonderful film footage that was taken at the ranch. So this is just a basic overview of the history of the ranch. There are many, many other wonderful things that I'm sure we'll be sharing with you in the future. We do have a small exhibit out in the lobby of the museum that you'll have to stop and check out before you leave today. And with that, I will turn it over to Salvador.
Hi, my name is Salvador Barrigan. I'm the curator of government records. When most people think of government records, they don't think of these beautiful pictures that you see here that you can find in manuscripts or in photo collections. They think of land records, deeds, probate records, nothing that's visually stimulating. So when looking at these collections and being relatively new to Nebraska, trying to figure out what to show a group of people in terms of what would be interesting, what would be colorful, and what all the above. So what I decided to look at was the only collection I could find where we had something visually stimulating, which was the Nebraska State Fair collection, which is actually a sub-collection of our State Board of Agriculture. Another interesting thing why I wanted to choose this collection was because it provides us a close connection to the existence of the state of Nebraska. The essential reason for existing is agriculture, and the State Fair has such a close relationship with the beginning of the state. If we go back a little bit, back to 1858, when the first bill created the Territorial Board of Agriculture, and it was introduced by former Governor Robert Furness, who was actually a member of the Territorial Council from Nemaha County. This bill introduced not only the Agriculture Board, but it also introduced the State Fair. The State Fair actually became an official part in 1858, and eventually it would evolve into what it is today. Recently, we've seen that there was controversy, I don't know, a couple years back maybe, that they were wanting to close the State Fair. And I don't know, there was a big uproar. I wasn't here then, but some people told me there was an uproar about how they could do this because this is such a close, important institution for the state. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the State Fair in general. The State Fair, the fundamental idea behind a State Fair is an exposition of what's the best of all of that state in terms of manufacturing, in terms of consumer products, in terms of agriculture products, horticulture, and so forth. In Nebraska, after the economic failure in 1857, Sterling Morton, an early Nebraska agriculturalist, noted the success and the survival of the Nebraska farmer above all other industries in his address at the first Territorial Fair. Agriculture began to emerge as a major industry of Nebraska in 1858, and in that year, it was Robert Furness, as I related earlier, when he introduced a bill, which was the Territorial Board of Agriculture, which was the original bill, which in fact encompassed the state board. This is a ticket, an actual ticket that was issued in the 1889 State Fair, giving us some view of what it looked like to go into the State Fair at the time. Now, the State Fair had many categories to be judged by. Obviously, it included livestock, machinery, art, mechanics, horticulture, and fruit. Morton later said of the first fair, when he was talking about it, in comparison to later fairs, such as this fair in 1889, that it consisted of, quote, some corn, a few specimens of small grain, half a dozen swine, and a few Devonshire cattle, which is true, but like all things, it evolved into something bigger. Eventually, the fair, there was, not only in Nebraska was, besides the other issues, there was a big issue between Lincoln and Omaha, who was going to be the capital, and they also vied for who was going to host the fair. But in 1899, the legislature provided permanent housing for the fair at the current location that it is at now, which is, I believe, a 3-mile distance from the capital. Well, maybe not exactly. This is another complimentary ticket to the State Fair, and this you can see the signature of Robert Furness, who at the time was the secretary for the State Fair, and the president, who was S.M. Barker. And the pass was to Professor U.E. Howard. Now, going a little bit back to livestock, livestock, according to McKelvey, has been the Nebraska farmer's greatest benefactor, being not only the founder of his prosperity, but also his savior. And this was very true when you look at the numbers and the statistics that you can find in this collection. I don't have those because there's tons and tons of pages that are found. You'd have to go to our collection to actually see them. But just to give you an example of what you could find in terms of livestock and what you could find in statistics was the 2 breeds of cattle that were appeared in the 1859 fair, the Devons and Durham Shorthorns. On October 26th of 1870, the Nebraska Central Agriculture and Breeders Association was also incorporated with headquarters at Ashland, Saunders County. And the object of this association was import and breed improved thoroughbred stock in the state. In 1860, there was approximately about 37,000 head of cattle. That increased to about 45,000 by 1870. And this was due to many reasons. One of them was to improve transportation methods, the railroads coming in and so forth. There is some special consideration to give to one particular family, that is the Retzlaw family. Reason is their farmstead is now on the National Register of Historic Places. And they were a very prominent family that took part in the fair. That had attendance there quite a bit, up into, I believe, they exhibit annually until about 1967, I believe they did. Now, just like the White Horse Ranch, they brought in a lot of horses also. They imported draft horses throughout the time that the State Fair commenced. In the 1900s, Frank Iams of St. Paul, Howard County, imported 28 black, and I'm going to butcher this word, Percherons. In 1901, he imported Shires, Clydes, Coachers, and Eams. And in the business for 25 years, he also imported a variety of royal bred stallions throughout that period also. This is a ownership badge to be worn. It's interesting if you look at the writing, it must be worn conspicuously. What's interesting is if you're an owner of something that was there, but they're asking to wear that, it's a little bit ironic. This is from the 1886 fair. You can notice the older gentleman. Some people said that was Robert Furness, who was the model for the older person and the young boy. Who knows? This was a first grand combined exposition, and what a combined exposition was is a combination of manufacturers, consumers, and horticulture. This occurred in 1894, and it also, I believe, ran in, let's say, parallel, I believe, with the Grand Columbian Exposition, or around about the same period of time. This is another ticket for the exposition, and if you look at the same name is up there, Robert Furness, who took part in this for a long time. He was part of the board for many years, and the account here was on the Union Pacific Railroad. That was the account name, and the pass was to a L.H. Corty. Here are some more passes, same names, same prominent people. And here we have a brochure up for the State Fair, a little propaganda bulletin explaining what the State Fair, a little bit about it internally, where it was being held and so forth, and also giving a little propaganda of the next fair, major fair of the era, which was the Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition, which we also have the records to in our collection. And that was in 1898. That's another ticket from 1900. Oops, I went back too far. And the last slide here is facts about Nebraska. You can see the stamps on it showing the different, when it was actually stamped, the actual official date. It shows compliments by the Nebraska State Board of Agriculture, which was the official agency which governed the Nebraska State Fair. And if you'd like to read more about the Department of Agriculture and the State Fair, you can go to our website, and you can go to government records and go to our finding aid, which actually has all the records listed for the State Fair, for the Board of Agriculture. There's a historical note if you want to read further on this subject and what we have. The collection consists of correspondence, scrapbooks, statistical books, not too many of those. But the core of the collection is letters, and we do have some photos, such as, well, not photos, but some prints that I was able to show to you today. So that is all.
I guess we'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I was interested in how large the factory was in Beatrice for the windmills. How many people were there?
That I'm not sure. We don't have the record specifically for that factory. Basically, all that we have in that historic trade literature collection are just a few brochures and things. Certainly, it wouldn't be that difficult to find out. I mean, we have other resources in the state archives, city directories and other things that it wouldn't be that difficult to determine that. But I can't really say for sure how large. It looked fairly impressive from that illustration, but I'm not sure how many people they employed there. Next question, anyone else? Yes.
Is the White Horse Ranch completely closed now then?
Yes.
Yes, basically, Carly and Dean Doherty have decided to retire, so they won't be coming back to open it up for tours. The family's still trying to decide what they want to do with the ranch, if they will sell off portions and keep part of it in the family. So they're still trying to determine what they will be doing with it, but it is closed to tours at this time.
How do you determine what becomes a part of the Historical Society collection?
Well, how do we determine what becomes part of our collections? That's, it's somewhat subjective, and it kind of changes over the years based on the interests of individual curators like ourselves. But basically, as the mission of the organization is to collect and preserve and interpret basically all the history of Nebraska. And so we have obviously a wide range of materials. So we kind of look at what we already have in our collections, and for certain things, we'll keep adding related materials because we have such a strong collection in a certain subject area. But at some point, you get to the point where, do we really need yet another, scrapbook from this little community organization? We have hundreds of those sorts of things. So it's kind of a somewhat subjective interpretation of how we decide what is going to be taken. But, for the most part, we just try and build on the collections we already have. And obviously we can't save everything. So we do try and work with other organizations as well, like including the university archives, various other county historical societies. And if we know that we don't have the room to deal with something, or we think that it might get more use at another facility, then we'll usually try and refer a donor to that specific organization.
And in terms of museum collections, in addition to things like condition, and if we already have similar examples, we really try to take things that have a good Nebraska story. So we won't take a doll just because it's an old doll, but we'll take a doll that might have a good story about that it was used in Nebraska by a specific individual, and we know when, and we know something about that person.
For government records, a little more objective. It has to do with retention schedules and policies set forth between the creating agency of the record and the state archives. And it usually follows looking at the administrative, fiscal, and the historical values of a document and how it interrelates with other documents within the record creating agency. You also look at the primary and secondary values of the document. There could be some intrinsic or extrinsic values that may not that go beyond just a mere administrative value. But usually those are set pretty much objectively, but there is some subjectivity when you're looking at, for example, new records that may arise within an agency. You need to look at that record with how it relates to that agency, not just as a record as if it stands alone, because no record, unlike a library where a book can stand on its own, a record can't. So you have to look at all those values. The context, the structure, and the content. So that's what we try to do, at least in government records.
Yes, sir.
Do you like a family heirloom visit stay at the museum, or do you sometimes pass it on to other museums or sell it again, or?
Well, if something is offered to us that maybe isn't quite appropriate for our collections, we'll oftentimes ask the potential donor before it's accepted to the Historical Society, if they'd like us to give them names of other more appropriate repositories, and then we're happy to sometimes contact other museums to help a donor out, try to find a more appropriate place. So that's something that we do. We have various historic sites around the state, as you may know, so oftentimes when things are sent here to be processed, occasionally they will be sent out to some of the other sites to be exhibited. We also do loans with other organizations, so sometimes things go out on loan. Your question about if things are ever sold or disposed of, now when we take things into the collections, we're really very careful to take things that we really want to have here permanently. In the past, that may not have always been the case, but it's really our intention for things to remain here permanently. You can't say never, because you never know what's going to happen. And things in the past were a little bit different circumstances, but for the most part, the things that we're taking in today that we really consider to be part of our permanent collections for the museum.
Do you actually purchase collections or pieces or whatever?
We do occasionally purchase things for the museum, but we have very limited funds to do so. So, a few times a year there might be a few things that we purchase, and that's the same thing with the library archives too.
Right. In fact, one of the collections I showed you, the Northwestern School of Taxidermy, most of those materials well, some of them were donated, but a lot of them we found like on eBay and other places and purchased them for our collections. So obviously we don't have a large budget in order to do that, but when we find an interesting item for, you know, $10, $15, you know, we don't have much of a problem going ahead and doing that. But for the most part, we depend upon people donating materials for our collections.
So do those pictures tell us something about your taste?
Well, yeah, maybe a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I thought they were kind of amusing. That's why I put them up there. I'm not a big hunter or anything, but I just thought it was kind of amusing. So that's why I decided to show you those today. Yes, Paul.
Some of the film footage that of the White Horse Ranch, Laura, that you mentioned, I have it on good authority that some of that will be shown in our next brown bag. So be sure to be looking for that.
Yes. Okay. Great. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. And like I said, if you have a chance, why don't you stop into the museum store after this and take a look at the White Horse Ranch exhibit that we have out in the lobby. All right. Thank you very much.